The government proclaimed religion as the opium of the masses. The power of the Bolsheviks is the power of Satan, was the answer of the patriarch. Thus, a new reality began in the USSR, the state that established itself as socialist, working-peasant, and atheistic. Then, in the early 1920s, both the Lenin-Trotsky government and the Russian Orthodox Church clergy with believers considered that religion was destroyed and forgotten. However, it turned out that ordinary people couldn't live without faith. But faith did not have to be orthodox. Before the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, Vladimir Lenin considered that the communist idea had to be brought to such a fanatic level to make people believe in it as fiercely and furiously as they had believed in God. In fact, this included creating a new faith, a faith in communism, and this faith was to become an official religion of the Soviet Union. But to establish a new religion, it was necessary to eradicate the previous one, and for this purpose, it was necessary to destroy priests and temples. So the Bolshevik terror machine started its work. I consider the years 1929 and 1930 in Ukrainian history to be the scissors that cut out the Ukrainian intelligentsia of priestly origin, who headed a social movement. And this was not just an ideological struggle, but a struggle to destroy Ukrainian life in Ukraine, as this allowed to orchestrate the Holodomor and the like, because then there would be no resistance of the people. Moreover, the situation on the Ukrainian lands occupied by Poland was no better. Formerly, the Polish Orthodox Church was autocephalous and recognized by the Polish government. But in fact, the Ministry of Religions in every way sabotaged the work of Metropolitan Dionysius through prohibiting him to convene the synod and ordering to conduct church services only in Polish. The government handed over more than 20,000 hectares of church land to colonizers. And since 1930, when the Polish policy of pacification allowed direct terror against Ukrainians, Orthodox churches were massively seized by the authorities and priests were arrested. The church acted clearly as the institution that expressed the state interests of the Ukrainian people in the absence of statehood. That's why both Greek Catholic and autocephalous Orthodox churches were subjected to persecution. The latter was also dismissed, simply due to its nationalistic aspirations. But the Ukrainian autocephalous Orthodox Church did not have such authority, the forces and such connections as the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church did. In Western Ukraine, the Russian, in fact Soviet Orthodox Church, was welcomed. Soviet power in Western Ukraine supported this church. The reason was simply to force the Greek Catholic and autocephalous Orthodox Ukrainian churches out of there. Then the Soviet authorities laid ideological mines that exploded in society later in the 1990s, after Ukraine gained independence, because Bolsheviks handed over to the Russian Orthodox Church dozens or perhaps hundreds of temples left from the destroyed, repressed churches. The Moscow Patriarchate used those temples with remaining 3 stone papal Greek Catholic crosses on their domes. Even chairs and benches remained from the Uniate and autocephalous churches. This was in opposition to the Russian Orthodox Church, which didn't allow its parishioners to sit during church liturgy services. But the Russian Orthodox Church didn't immediately start to collaborate with Bolshevik authorities. The episcopate, led by Patriarch Tikhon, included former Black Hundreds who were arrogant monarchy supporters and considered the Bolshevik power to be godless and satanic. On January the 19th, 1918, Patriarch Tikhon issued his appeal.
І там були такі слова.
It said, "Wake up, madmen, stop your bloody massacres. What you do is not only cruel, but it's Satan's work. By the power vested in us from God, we anathematize you. You brought Russia to a shameful world. Our great homeland is conquered, divided. Its lands were taken away. It was very symbolic that the Orthodox patriarch accused Bolsheviks of losing Ukrainian lands. Is that not the best example of the imperial thinking of the Russian church hierarchs?
Насамперед йдеться про Україну. Хіба це не найкращий приклад імперського мислення ієрархів російської церкви?
But on July the 21st, 1918, Patriarch Tikhon wrote, "I and my flock expressed the Soviet government profound gratitude for such a merciful attitude to my activity. The Church prays for the Russian state and Soviet power. But repentance came too late. The Bolshevik government came to understanding that the Church is its class enemy, and any enemy must be destroyed, for which special methods and instruments were developed."
Надходили розпорядження, що в кожній школі має бути куточок войовничих безвірників.
Moscow ordered to establish a corner of the militant atheist at each school and to disseminate anti-clerical literature and posters. As for religious holidays, they were invented to make people drink and keep them in ignorance. By the way, the communists hung a poster depicting two drunks with the inscription Easter, a religious holiday.
Це, до речі, наші комуністи, вони чомусь вивішували такий плакат, де показують двоє п'яних, і от Пасха, релігійне свято.
But societies of militant atheists used not only Enlightenment methods, they initiated the cutting down of Orthodox crosses along roads. Further, atheists realized that their actions went unpunished and they began to cut crosses down from church domes, and then they began to throw bells away from bell towers, and also priests who tried to resist. So a progressive and innocent idea was turned into an atheistic terror machine. However, in the early 1920s, the sinister nature of the anti-church policy had not yet been manifested because the Soviet government was trying to act by the carrot and stick method. People were offered an alternative faith, but this faith itself was not well developed and the methods of its introduction were rude and non-intricate.
Радянська влада 20-ті роки намагалася, замінити фактично християнство.
In the 1920s, the Soviet power tried to replace Christianity, the Christian religion, with a new Soviet religion. What was the difference? Christianity offered salvation, eternal life, and at least gave people hope. Unlike the previous religion, communism did not give such hope. It taught to live for the sake of future generations, and those who lived had to sacrifice themselves. In Christianity, only holy martyrs sacrificed, and communism made the whole generation sacrifice. Therefore, it was clear why communism, as pseudo-religion, didn't take roots.
Покласти себе як жертву. І зрозуміло, що прижитися просто не міг як релігія.
But Bolshevik leaders did not abandon the idea to bind people to them using pseudo-religious ideology. Lenin-Trotsky even wrote a special article, Vodka, Church and Cinema, in which he unveiled three main levers of manipulation of the masses, religion being not the last of them. For this reason, when people did not welcome the new unusual communist religion, they were proposed the same communist idea, but veiled in the church. Agents of the state political office separated a small part of the Ukrainian Orthocephalous Church and called it the Church of Christ's Activity, Brotherhood.
Бачачи цей вплив, в 25-му році органи НКВС, ДПУ створюють діяльно
In 1925, the NKVD GPU bodies established the Church of Christ's Activity in Ukraine. And this church, according to the documents, included Checker officers who were involved in establishing local parishes. It was recorded that in late 1925, 300 parishes were established throughout Ukraine. They were small in number because people didn't understand what the Church of Christ's Activity was intended for. They attended church, but they were unaware of it, and everything began to focus on Church of Christ's Activity, led by the head of a district or village. But in fact, people refused to attend church led by their local party leaders. Therefore, the communities failed to work. That is, the Bolshevik aim to establish an obedient pocket party church was not realized. For this reason, in 1927, the Bolshevik government quietly turned down its activity and dismissed the Church of Christ's activity. It was the first attempt, but not the last Bolshevik attempt, to establish a pseudo-religious organization using special service agents. Having destroyed the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in 1929 and 1930, Bolsheviks simulated and established a KGB structure, the Ukrainian Orthodox Autocephalous Church, which worked from 1930 to 1939, and it fraudulently conquered people living in Dnipro, Ukraine. But the Russian Orthodox Church could not stand the test of the revolution. Retrograde and resistance of the Church to developing and evolving worried not only the laity, but also many priests. Some of them united into the All-Russian Union of Democratic Orthodox Clergy, which started the movement for church renovation. The direction received the same name, Renovationists. Later, they came into conflict with the arrested patriarch Tikhon, and for this, they were actively supported by the Soviet government. Subsequently, the Renovationists formed a separate church, which fell under the control of the Bolshevik regime.
На 1923 рік вже половина десь православного єпископату.
In 1923, half of the Orthodox episcopate became Renovationists. There were many laymen in this movement. Renovationists stood for reformist positions, such as the abolition of monasticism as such. That is, in Orthodoxy, there was only a secular clergy. They wanted to abolish the principle of celibacy for church hierarchs that would allow bishops to marry and have families.
Тобто єпископи могли одружуватися і мати сім'ю.
In fact, the Church of Renovationists originated in Ukraine back in 1920, although their parishes were small, but they worked in the same field as supporters of Ukrainian autocephaly. Renovationists used the Ukrainian language in church services, and parishioners were also involved in making important decisions. And in 1925, Ukrainian apologists completely separated from the Russian Patriarchate and founded their separate church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Autocephalous Church, or the UOAC, not to be confused with the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, the UAOC. In 1927, with the unspoken support of Soviet power, there were over 2,000 parishes in the UOAC.
2000 приходів.
From 1935, the NKVD began to readjust the structure of Renovationists from automized, democratic, to a clear vertical line of power under the Soviet principle. And this Renovationist movement was headed by Alexander Vedenitsky, who was the founder of the Church Renewal of 1917. That is, the Renovationist movement was a kind of means used by the Soviet power to suppress orthodoxy. From the mid-1920s, Bolsheviks ensured that people began to massively leave their churches for ones established by the special services, because the latter compared favorably with religious organizations unsupported by the authorities. Soviet communities were distinguished by security, and traditional Ukrainian churches were subjected to terror, while communist ones developed freely and flourished. Seeing this situation, the Ukrainian immigrant government adopted a law and included a whole section in it on the support of Ukrainian churches in the constitution. In particular, the status of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church were defined. The freedom of belief for other churches was provided if they were not contrary to the welfare of the state and national interests. It was expected to adopt a separate law to regulate the actions and the canonical and legal grounds of certain church hierarchs.
Діяльності, канонічні засади, правові особливості діяльності окремих церковних ієрархів.
This included one hierarch. First of all, the OUN leaders wanted to regulate the action of Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky, who angrily criticized the OUN's sabotage and terrorist activities. But the OUN leaders couldn't influence him because he was an independent figure in Galicia. Metropolitan Sheptytsky was the first to address Ukrainian believers in their native language, and his reign started with the protection of workers, builders who rebelled. That explained why he soon became the spiritual leader of the population of Western Ukraine. Then Sheptytsky supported in any possible way the disadvantaged of Galicia. He founded enterprises, banks and credit unions. The funds raised were directed towards building hospitals, schools, providing free meals to the homeless, and even founding the first peasant women's clinic. The Soviet power tried to deprive the church of influencing education and public life and monitoring helpless people. That is, the church acted as a public institution in all spheres, but above all in spirituality. In short, the church was the most authoritative institution in Galicia. For this reason, the Soviet power tried to limit the church to religious activities, only to which the Metropolitan answered that the church mission was to be involved in all spheres of the lives of the local population. The Soviet government carried out reprisals in response. Moreover, the reprisals were directed at the Metropolitan. Houses in the native village of Sheptytsky, Pribitchi, were searched. The NKVD tortured the Metropolitan's brother Leon, his wife Jadwiga, their pastor-priest Dominique, and all those who lived in the house. The estate was undermined. There were no reasons to destroy this apolitical family engaged in nothing. The only explanation for these atrocities was the powerless rage of the Bolsheviks, who could do the same with Andrei Sheptytsky. Together with another brother, Clement, he actively helped to fight the Bolshevik occupation.
Під час нападу НКВС на одну з шкіл, де проходили вишкіл.
During the NKVD attack on one of the schools where leaders of the Ukrainian insurgent army trained, a hierarch of the Studite order was killed. At that time, this order was headed by Metropolitan Sheptytsky's brother Clement.
Орден цей очолював рідний брат митрополита Шептицького, Клементій Шептицький. В одному з монастирів, де, власне, цього ордену був також діяв підпільний військовий шпиталь, де лікувалися.
And in one of this order's monasteries, there was an underground military hospital where wounded rebels recovered. It was obvious that Clement could not do this without the consent of his respected brother, Metropolitan.
Клементій робити такі речі без згоди чи без дозволу свого шановного брата митрополита.
There is reliable data that the Tsar's secret police monitored Sheptytsky's acts before the first arrival of the Russian army in Galicia in 1914. This is evidenced by the fact that Moscow was categorically opposed to the opening of a Ukrainian university in Lviv, which was Sheptytsky's initiative. Therefore, the Metropolitan's arrest and exile to the bowels of Russia was an expected measure of the Moscow Church and the state. It can be said that the first arrest of Metropolitan Sheptytsky in the early 20th century was the launch of the terror against the Ukrainian Church, and it ended with the complete destruction of Ukrainian national churches, mass shootings, and arrests of priests, and the fact that during the collapse of the Soviet Union, more than half of the acting priests served at the USSR State Security Committee.
Не страшні є цифри, якщо ви це знаєте, тільки за жовтень, листопад 1937 року.
Terrible figures say that only in October, November 1937, 385 priests were arrested in the Poltava Oblast. In a week and a half, another 483 people involved in the church sacristans were also arrested. They disappeared and were considered missing. In January to April, 285 priests were killed in the Poltava Oblast.
Квітень, ще 285 на Полтавщині знищено священників.
The most difficult stage of persecution against the National Church began in April of 1925, when the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SSR was headed by Lazar Kaganovich, who had Ukrainophobic and anti-clerical views. He got the idea to confiscate church temples on the pretext of opening a club, theatre or school in the church, and there were many such anonymous statements to plunder temples and turn them into dance floors. But the Bolsheviks considered the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church as hostile from its very beginning. Therefore, the Soviet power, using fake trials, accused the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church of counter-revolutionary activity, espionage and foreign intelligence. That is, they applied any serious criminal articles to discredit the church, and as a result, the church was liquidated. The elimination of priests was only the first stage in the fight of the Soviet power against the church. Then the time was rife for the destruction of temples, as even the presence of churches in the settlement, and even if the building was a warehouse in which there were no masses held, they reminded people of God, and passers-by blessed themselves and said prayers. So finally, the Soviet government decided to destroy churches. In 1923, the Bolshevik government's decree on the state treasury came into force, especially established to store values seized from the people.
Це государственне хранилище, куди мали стікатися всі
It was the state treasury into which church values should be deposited from the territories conquered by Bolsheviks. At that time, Lenin-Trotsky's wife headed the state treasury because she was well aware where and what was stored in Ukraine, including the Sofia Kievska Cathedral and the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. It was the state treasury that began the so-called church confiscations.
Більшовики масово розстрілювали дворян, інтелігенцію, царських чиновників, військових.
The Bolsheviks massacred numerous nobles, intelligentsia, Tsarist officials and military men. Their property was confiscated, and their jewelry, gold and silver articles that could easily be sold at the international auctions went to the state treasury. Already in 1923, Canada banned its citizens from buying the above stolen items on auctions, while other countries continued buying them. Therefore, when the flows of royal and noble jewels dried up, a decision was made to plunder church values. But you can watch this in our next program. For now, remember that every phenomenon has its pros and cons. It's pro et contra.